everything changed.
Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain American Pickle. This movie tells the story of an Orthodox Jewish factory preserved in pickle brine for 100 years. When he wakes up in New York City, he tries to track down his great-grandson. Will a 100-years-old man survive in the modern world? Let's find out in American Pickle. An American Pickle begins by showing flashbacks of a Jewish man named Herschel Greenbaum who lived in Russia in 1919. Every day, Herschel worked as a hoe worker. However, misfortune after misfortune always followed him. Until one day, he saw a beautiful woman in the market. He then ventured to greet the woman, but it turned out that the woman was annoyed with a fish seller in the market who sold his wares at a very high price. As Herschel approached her, the woman left instead. Even though he was desperate, Herschel was determined to win the beautiful woman's heart. The next day, he worked even harder and managed to set aside some of his wages so he could buy smoked fish for the woman. While at the market, Herschel again met the woman. Full of confidence, he then bought smoked fish to give to her. Immediately, the woman's heart melted and she accepted his gift with pleasure. They got to know each other and talked. The woman was named Sarah and apparently lived in the same village as Herschel. Herschel was very happy because Sarah was also a devout Jewish believer. Their relationship is getting closer. After being in love for some time, Herschel and Sarah then decided to get married. However, not long after they made a sacred vow to remain faithful and love each other as long as they live, Russian troops stormed their village and massacred the Jews there. Herschel and Sarah managed to escape and decided to migrate to the United States. Herschel was determined to make his wife happy upon arrival in the United States. Sarah did not complain when they had to stay in the refugee camp for a while. Soon, Herschel got a job at a pickle factory. Despite having no skill and experience in pickle making, he was a diligent and tenacious person and did his job of cleaning the factory very well. Although his wages as a janitor at the factory were very small, he was able to set aside some of his money to buy a burial ground for himself and his wife, as a symbol that they would love each other until the end of their lives. After saving little by little from his wages, Herschel finally rented a small house to support his small family, which would soon grow with their child. He also vowed that he would work harder so that his wife and children, even grandchildren and all future generations, could live happily and prosperously. Hearing this, Sarah became very happy. The next day, Herschel did his usual factory cleaning. However, when he was cleaning the attic area, he saw a lot of mice running around. Because the number of mice was very large and Herschel, who happened to be afraid of mice, felt that the mice were about to attack him. He was running away from the mice and accidentally fell into a large pot filled with pickled pickles. Right after Herschel plunged into the pot, the other employees closed the big pot and no one noticed that he was in it. Not only that, it turned out that the pickle factory where Herschel worked had been sealed for health reasons. The factory owner decided to close the factory that very day and no one knew where Herschel was trapped in the pickle pot. The years have changed, and the pickle factory is now an old abandoned building. 100 years have passed since the incident, and now in 2019, two teenagers are seen flying a toy drone around an old building that used to be a pickle factory. The drone entered the factory area and accidentally hit the lid of the pickle pot, opening it slightly. The two teenagers then entered the old factory building to search for their drone and found large pots inside the factory. Out of curiosity, they opened the lid of the pot to see its contents. But they were surprised by Herschel, who woke up from the pot. The news of Herschel's appearance from inside the pickle pot suddenly went viral. In a press conference, scientists and doctors who conducted research on Herschel revealed that the very high salt content in the pickle pot had preserved his body and he hibernated for 100 years. Herschel didn't fully understand what had happened to him, because all he knew was that the circumstances around him had changed drastically and he wasn't too happy with all the changes. Not only that, he also had to accept the harsh reality that his beloved wife, Sarah, had died 80 years ago, as well as his other children and descendants. However, Herschel received news that one of his descendants was still alive, which high great-grandson named Ben. The hospital has contacted Ben and he will pick up Herschel. After meeting Ben, Herschel is very surprised because Ben looks like him when he was younger. Ben was also surprised and happy to meet his great-grandfather, who was previously thought to have died. Ben then took his great-grandfather to his apartment. Herschel, who actually lived in the year 1900, is still difficult to adapt to modern life in the fast-paced and sophisticated millennial era. Herschel was still amazed to see the skyscrapers and various types of vehicles passing by. When he arrived at Ben's apartment, he was amazed by the situation in the apartment, which he thought was very luxurious and large compared to where he lived with Sarah before. Ben said that he is currently developing an application called BoopBop which functions to scan a product to find out whether the product is worth selling to consumers or not. But Herschel looks clueless and uninterested in Ben's work. Herschel then looks at the walls in Ben's apartment which are lined with various displays, and when he asks for a David Bowie wall display, Ben replies that he is a famous singer. Herschel then asked where the photos of the Greenbaums were. Ben then takes out an old photo album that contains photos of the entire Greenbaum family, including portraits of Herschel and Sarah and Ben's parents. Herschel felt happy and touched because it turned out that all of his descendants had succeeded in becoming successful people as he had hoped. But he also felt sad because they had all died and he could not witness firsthand how they struggled to achieve that success. When reminiscing about the past, Herschel remembers the burial ground he bought earlier and invites Ben to go there. However, Ben objected and admitted that the burial plot had been sold because he was tempted by a fairly high price offer. After all, the location of the land was quite strategic. Even though Ben had explained it, Herschel still insisted on visiting the burial ground. In the end, Ben couldn't help but invite his great-grandfather to go there. Although the environment around the cemetery has changed a lot, Herschel still remembers the exact location of the burial ground he bought earlier and finds the graves of his wife and children which are outside the public cemetery area and look very neglected. Herschel then invited Ben to join in praying for the spirits of their families who had passed away. But Ben didn't seem to care and instead checked his cell phone when Herschel said a prayer. While Herschel was praying, a group of construction workers came to the burial site and asked them to leave the place immediately because they would be doing construction work there. The workers then put up banners advertising Russian vodka on billboards overlooking the burial grounds of his wife and son. Herschel, disgusted, then beats the construction workers and Ben, who tries to intervene, gets involved, until they are both thrown into prison. Ben pays the ransom so they can both get out of prison. But he then blamed Herschel for causing him to go to jail and now he can no longer get investors because he has a criminal record. Ben is annoyed that the image of his application has been tarnished and is now in danger of going bankrupt. All his efforts to develop the application were in vain. Herschel then suggested that Ben start another business and asked him to jointly start a business selling pickled products. Ben flatly refused his invitation, which annoyed Herschel because Ben underestimated the business of selling pickled products that used to be Herschel's job. Herschel and Ben had an argument with each other, until finally Herschel decided to leave Ben's apartment and start his own business for the pickle product without Ben's help. Herschel was determined to run his business with tenacity and perseverance so that he could buy back his family's burial ground and remove the billboard. However, because Herschel did not have the money to buy pickles at the supermarket, he scavenged several trash cans around the neighborhood to find pickles to be pickled. Not only that, he also made a stroller from used goods which he would later use to sell his pickles around town. Unexpectedly, his pickles turned out to be in great demand by many buyers because the manufacturing process is still natural, so they taste delicious. On the other hand, Ben, who is getting worse because he has not yet found an investor, hears viral news on social media about a pickle seller whose product is very good. He learned about this from a wealthy investor he met at a restaurant. In fact, the pickle product is so famous, the investor plans to invest his money in the pickle product seller, none other than Herschel. Ben, irritated and rivaled that Herschel's pickle business is now booming, tries to overthrow his great-grandfather's business in various ways. Ben accidentally finds out that Herschel makes these pickled products from ingredients he picks up in the trash. He then contacted the Food and Drug Regulatory Agency and reported the matter. The next day, several officers sealed and confiscated all of Herschel's pickled products, and even imposed a fine on him because the processed pickles did not meet health standards. Herschel became desperate because his business is now threatened with bankruptcy. But then someone suggested that he use his popularity on social media to attract interns to work and help him develop his pickles business. It turned out that many interns were willing to work for Herschel voluntarily to gain experience. Even the interns helped finance the business, so he no longer scavenged for leftover materials in the trash. Herschel then taught the interns to sort and process ingredients for fresh pickles to the natural pickling process. Because it meets health standards, Herschel's pickled products are increasingly selling well. With marketing techniques used by interns, he managed to sell hundreds of pickles every day and raised money to buy back his family's burial ground. After legally returning to his family's burial ground, he tore down the billboard and cleared the burial ground. Herschel then returns to Ben's apartment and proves that he has managed to buy back the Greenbaum family's burial ground with his efforts and hard work selling pickles. Ben suddenly felt embarrassed, but this did not dampen his intention to subvert Herschel's business. Ben then remembered that his great-grandfather was a very fanatical Jew. He then suggested to Herschel to download the Twitter application because he was now a famous figure. Herschel then began to tweet controversial statements that offend religion because he is a fanatical Jew who hates Christians. Despite initial protests and boycotts from many Christians, Herschel was later seen as an icon of free speech and a source of inspiration by many and made him even more famous. One day, Herschel was invited as a speaker in a friendly debate forum. Ben, in disguise, attends the forum and questions Herschel's thoughts on Christianity. However, Herschel again voiced his hatred for Christians, which then sparked public anger and hatred. He was increasingly criticized and wanted by the police for causing unrest in the community with his controversial statements. Since his immigration papers could not be found, the government tried to deport him back to Russia. Herschel, who does not want to return to Russia, then asks Ben's help to take him to the Canadian border through the forest. Herschel says that he will never return to America and Ben agrees to take him. After arriving at the edge of the forest, Ben, who couldn't bear to let Herschel walk through the forest alone, decided to accompany his great-grandfather. During the trip, Herschel was very concerned about Ben, who had been injured. Ben was touched by Herschel's warmth and affection like his own father. While they were resting, Ben then revealed that all this time, he was the one who tried to subvert Herschel's efforts and indirectly incited Herschel to voice hatred against Christians to the public. Ben did this because he was very jealous of his success. Ben also admits that he has apostatized from Judaism and is now an atheist. Hearing this, Herschel became very angry with Ben because he had become a traitor in the Greenbaum family. Herschel, who was overcome with emotion, then beat Ben until he passed out. However, the small commotion was heard by several police officers who were patrolling the edge of the forest. Herschel then fled with Ben's bag and left him alone. When Herschel searches Ben's bag, he finds Ben's ID and a beard trimmer. He then has the idea to disguise himself as Ben and use his identity because in fact they both look similar. Confidently, he approached the policeman and said that he was Ben Greenbaum and showed the real Ben as Herschel Greenbaum in disguise. As a result, Ben was immediately arrested by the police because he could not show his real identity. After going through a series of legal processes, Ben, who was mistaken for Herschel, was eventually deported to Russia. Arriving in Russia, Ben is very confused because no one can speak English in Herschel's hometown. He was knocked on his heart when he found a synagogue and decided to convert back to Judaism because he was born and raised in a devout Jewish family. Meanwhile, Herschel, who now uses Ben's identity, returns to the man's apartment. While checking Ben's belongings, he stumbles upon a scribble that Ben drew as a child. It turns out that the name of the Boop Bop application that is being developed by Ben comes from Ben's favorite nickname for his parents. Herschel also found photos of Ben as a child who was very close to his parents. Herschel also realized that Ben had always loved and remembered his family in his heart all this time. Herschel decides to return to his hometown to find Ben. He finally met Ben, who had repented and reverted to Judaism and followed his teachings obediently. Herschel then asks Ben to respect religion and his entire family. Ben then apologizes for selling the family burial ground just for profit. Herschel and Ben reconciled and decided to start all over again by working together. A few months later, Herschel and Ben returned to America after Herschel had updated his identity so that he would no longer be banned by the immigration department. The film closes by showing Ben and Herschel who are on a pilgrimage to the family grave and pray together solemnly.